life has a certain rhythm. I think in different cultures, different historical periods, the rhythm is different. There's a social historian at NYU, Postman I think is his name, who talks about the invention of childhood. That until a couple hundred years ago, there was no such thing as childhood. Person was a baby. At the age of 6, he went out to work. Couldn't survive unless everybody worked. The idea is a period of time which is relatively irresponsible and minimal demands of schooling, and the rest of the time you can find yourself and build your identity. It didn't exist. Most cultures, there are high points and low points in the year, or high points and neutral points in the year, points of special emphasis. I think it's common to spend time preparing for the points of high emphasis. What isn't common, I think, is what happens afterwards. What do you do with the high point once it's over? For many people, it's just over. You then occupy your mind either with the next high point coming up, or you shift into neutral gear for the interim time when no high point is on the horizon. The Torah has an additional strategy of carrying over from the high point into the next period of time. Not enough to say that the high point inspired me, and maybe now I'm a better person, living on a higher plane. Formally, institutionally, there's a carryover into the next period. So, for example, when it comes to Shabbos, Saturday night, there's Malav Malka. Malav Malka is a continuation of Shabbos. It's projecting Shabbos into the next week. It's a carryover from Shabbos. One conducts Malav Malka in Shabbos clothes, and there are special songs to sing. Of course, one does it without the formal restrictions of Shabbos, but still, the Shabbos spirit is still there. Hasidim have a play on words. When a major holiday is over, the next Shabbos can be called in Yiddish Shabbos Noch Yom Tov, which in one meaning says it's the Shabbos after Yom Tov, but another meaning of Noch is that it's still Yom Tov. It's Shabbos, more of Yom Tov, a continuation of Yom Tov. And there are some customs which enact this across large periods of time. You have a lulav that you use on Sukkot. Many save the lulav and the aravas. Hadassah are used for fragrance, but the lulav and the aravas, and they burn them in the fire with which you bake the matzahs. So you have them 5 or 6 months later, and you take this thing which you use for a mitzvah in the fall, and you use it to bake the matzahs that you're going to use in the spring. Same with leftover oil from Chanukah can be burned for the sake of the burning of the chametz. Erev Pesach. There's a sense of connecting the high points, not leaving them simply as high points without any carryover. One way of conceiving of Shabbos is that the 3 days before Shabbos, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, prepare for Shabbos, and Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday carry over the influence of Shabbos to the next week. And that's reflected even in the law, because you have to make Havdalah, marking the end of Shabbos. Suppose you don't have wine, and you don't have the ability to make Havdalah, you can make Havdalah until Tuesday morning. You don't refrain from eating as you ordinarily would, but you can make Havdalah until Tuesday morning, because Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday are still related to prior Shabbos. So the idea is that after the high point is over, it's desirable to try to carry the high point through. Now, one way you do that is you have to analyze the high point and see what lessons it teaches, and then try to find ways to implement those lessons in the coming period of time. There are a couple of lessons of the Menorah which are not very well known, but I think that they are useful in this regard to try to project from Chanukah into the coming period of time. Many years ago, Rav Zevin put out a classic called Moadim B'Halacha, Holidays in Jewish Law. It's translated into English. When I got it, it wasn't translated in English, but it has been translated. It's a beautiful job. And he makes some remarks on the menorah and how it's lit and how the laws of the menorah work, which I think are useful. Here's one. We all know that one way of beautifying the mitzvah is to add a new candle each night. That happens to be a machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. This is a difference of opinion. We follow the opinion of Beis Hillel. The first night 1, next night 2, next night 3. Beis Shammai says the opposite. First night you should light 8, next night 7, next night 6, next night 5. Complete opposite. Of course, the number of candles will signify what night it is, if you know whose rule you're following. You see 3 candles, you don't know whether it's the 3rd night or the 5th night, depending upon whose rule you're following. What's the difference between them? What's the essence of the disagreement? So Rav Zevin brings down, I forget who, one of the commentators who does a survey of the difference of opinion between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and he sees a theme in their differences, their disagreements. The Beis Shammai emphasizes potential, and Beis Hillel emphasizes actual. Both are important, both are fundamental, but one emphasizes the one and one emphasizes the other. Now, in this case, what happened with the oil? There are many stories. Perhaps the simplest story is the oil burned more slowly. The first night they filled up all of the menorah and they ignited it, but at the end of the first night they found that only 1/8 of the oil was burned. 7/8 remained. It burned more slowly. The next night, another 1/8 of the original amount burned, and so it was night by night. Beis Shammai's analysis is this. So what happened is that the oil isn't the normal oil anymore. The oil now is slow-burning oil. When did that happen? That happened immediately. That happened in preparation for the first night's lighting. Became slow-burning oil. On the first night, how many nights of slow-burning oil did you have? You had 8 nights worth. The second night, 1/8 of that was used up. So how many nights of slow-burning oil do you have in the second night? 7 nights worth. The third night you have 6 nights worth left. So, says Beis Shammai, look into the essence. The essence is that oil's character was changed. So make the number of candles correspond to the amount of miracle oil that you have. And that's why it goes 8, 7, 6, going down, diminishing. Now Beis Hillel, it's very important to get this right. Beis Hillel agrees with Beis Shammai. Yes, the miracle was to change the character of the oil. And yes, on the first night you have 8 nights of miracle oil, the second night you have 7 nights of miracle oil, 6 nights of miracle oil. That's true. But, says Beis Hillel, we don't celebrate the miracle oil. We celebrate the burning. The miracle oil is only potential. The mitzvah is to ignite it and that it should burn. It should give out a light. That's the mitzvah. And the mitzvah celebrates the illumination that the oil caused. The first night you had 1 night's worth of illumination. Second night you had 2 nights of illumination. Third night you had 3 nights of illumination. That's why you increase the number of candles rather than decrease it. Now this is a symptom of, as I said, a much more general and deep difference of opinion. Do you celebrate the potential or the actual? This has many implications for classical Jewish understanding and for nuances of Jewish practice. For example, Moses is on Mount Sinai, receiving the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God. While he's there, at the end, the Jewish people make the golden calf. God says to Moses, go, get down. The people have strayed from me, and the normal progression can't be fulfilled. Now, when God uses the word go down, lech, raid, go down, the Talmud comments, go down from your greatness. Go down from your greatness. Why? Moses was a very great man. How did he get to be such a great man? He worked very hard to achieve it. But, and here's the key point, the achievement, the ultimate result of all his work, is a divine gift. It's not as if his work created it. It's a divine gift. Maybe God wouldn't have given the gift to somebody who didn't work to achieve it. That's true. It may be necessary, but it doesn't produce the outcome. The outcome is a divine gift. Then you have to ask, why did God give him the gift? What was God's intention in giving him the gift? Was it to recognize his hard work? You worked so hard, so you deserve to have your work crowned with success. The answer is no. That's not why God gave him that greatness. God gave him that greatness because it would be useful for the Jewish people. He could do something with it for the Jewish people. The greatness that he received is only a potential. But the potential's existence only is meaningful if it's actually used. Now what happened is, when the Jewish people made the golden calf, they descended, they deteriorated. They no longer had the station where they could benefit from Moses' greatness. So God said, then you lose it. I didn't give it to you for you. I gave it to you for what you could do for them. They can't take it from you now, so then you lose it. This is an exquisite illustration of the idea that the inner potential is not the goal. The inner potential only has meaning if it's used externally. A similar element in a famous biblical story, God commands Abraham and Isaac to go through the sacrifice of Isaac. When it's over, the Torah says Abraham returned to his young men, and they went together to Beersheba. So the question that's asked is, why does the Torah say they went together to Beersheba? Isn't it obvious they would go together? How did you think they were going to go? You take the high road and I'll take the low road. I mean, they're his servants. They're caring for the animal. Of course they're going to go together. Not only that, but together, that's the third time together appears in the story, and the together is very significant when it comes up. So the reader says, why did the Torah bother to tell me that they're together? I must give myself some credit. I thought of this myself, but then I saw it in the writings of Rav Kook, and then I knew that it had a good source. Rav Kook says Abraham experienced one of the greatest spiritual tests and successes of all time. Could he still relate to the servants left behind? Or was he spiritualized out of their environment, out of their sphere, to the point where he couldn't relate to them anymore? So the Torah says he went with them together. It stresses together. He was still able to be together with them. That's typical of Jewish spiritual achievement and Jewish spiritual gifts. By the way, I think the word gifts there, it's common in English to speak that way, and it's a pretty significant word. They're for the sake of what you can do when you can be together with the others. They mustn't push you to the point where you can't relate to it, because that was what it was given to you for. So now, here's something which I think it's worthwhile contemplating. Each of us has certain strengths, either because we were born and raised that way, our early environment, our natural tendencies took us that way, or we had certain striking experiences which stimulate us in that direction, or certain inspirations. If I look at those events as divine investments in me, then I'm going to treat them very differently. If they're divine investments, and I remember that this investment was made in me in order that I should be able to do something for others, then my attitude towards others who need me or come to ask for help from me is going to be very different. Sometimes when I try to help people and they want to express their gratitude, I tell them many people, when I was developing, took their time and freely gave me their advice, their information, their example, their instruction to help me develop. I'm paying back that debt. They invested in me, so I'm investing in other people. That's an answer, and it's, I think, a meaningful and adequate answer, but what I'm telling you now is much deeper than that. Because I didn't meet them by accident. They didn't happen to be the people in my environment who had these gifts which I specifically needed. All of that is divine providence. And that being the case, ultimately, it's God's investment in me. And if it's God's investment in me, I have to realize that it was given to me only for the sake of what I can do with it for others. Just like Beis Hillel says about lighting the Chanukah light. So if you have in mind the menorah, and you have in mind the fact that what we celebrate is the illumination that comes out of the menorah, and then think, in what way can I spread illumination in the world? So then we've learned a lesson from Chanukah, and we can take it with us. That's one. Here's another one. Many books talk about the profound philosophical clash between the Greeks and the Jews. One of, or maybe the most significant clash is that for the Greeks, nature is everything. And for the Jews, nature is nothing. Nature is a no thing. What we call nature is just when God runs the world in a repetitive, categorized way. What we call miracles when God runs the world in a way that isn't repetitive and categorized. It breaks the categories that we're normally used to. But it's all God's activity. The only thing in the world that isn't God's activity is human free choice. Everything else is God's activity. So, our point of view and their point of view are utterly, utterly opposed. It's an absolute contradiction. Now what happened? The Greeks took over the land of Israel, and they performed all sorts of abominations, although that wasn't their intention. Their intention wasn't to do something abominable. Their intention was just to do what Greeks do. So, for example, they put up a statue to Zeus in the temple, and they offered pigs to Zeus in the temple. They didn't do that to spite us. Offering pigs to the gods was common, widespread practice. They would just follow their common, widespread practice. Since their army was occupying us, obviously, in their minds, their gods are stronger than our God, and they're taking advantage of their superiority and doing what they normally do, what they always do. To us, it's an abomination. Pigs, Zeus, the statue of a foreign god, and pigs in the temple. So that triggered a rebellion. And the rebellion was successful, was crowned by a miracle. So we light the menorah. What are we celebrating? Sometimes it's described like this. They have philosophy, and we have philosophy. What we're celebrating is the triumph of our philosophy over their philosophy. Their philosophy is false and degraded in certain ways. Our philosophy is true and holy. And we won the war, and we won the war with a visible miracle which violates their idea of nature. So it's a triumph of our philosophy over their philosophy. And that's what we're celebrating. I think that's superficial. I think it's superficial and dangerous. I think it's a way of winning the battle, but maybe losing the war. Because there's another facet of Greek philosophy, which is equally, if not more dangerous. And it's one which we're much more likely to be fooled by and dragged into. What is a human being? What is a human being? What's essential about a human being? What's most important about a human being? The Greeks defined humans as rational animals. To be human, you have to have a certain sort of body. An angel could be rational and smart and well-educated and moral and everything else. It wouldn't be human because it doesn't have a human body. And you have to have the power of reason. That's what sets us apart from all the other animals. That's what's essential to us. Human beings are a rational animal. Okay, if the essence of human beings to be a rational animal, then thinking is the highest human activity. Because when you're thinking, you're using your reason. And what thoughts should you think? Well, the highest human thoughts are the thoughts of philosophy. The fact that it is a philosopher writing these lines is completely irrelevant, non-prejudicial. So, the highest human being is the philosopher, said the philosopher. Indeed, one of my colleagues at Hopkins pointed out, an interesting problem for Aristotle is this. Here I am philosophizing. Philosophizing! Down the hall there's somebody playing the saxophone, and he's disturbing me. He's making it hard for me to concentrate. Why shouldn't I shoot him? Why shouldn't I shoot him? He's an inferior. He's wasting his life. The essence of mankind is thought. And he's not devoting himself to thought, and his activity is disturbing my thought. So why shouldn't I shoot him? Interesting problem for Aristotle. That's how they define the human being. Now, if we're going to celebrate the triumph of Jewish philosophy over Hellenistic Greek philosophy, we're reinforcing that picture of man. What we're saying is, you have the wrong philosophy, and we have the right philosophy. And that's why we're superior. Meaning, because our thinking is going to be better than your thinking, that's why we're superior to you. But all that means to buy their definition of what it is to be human. But their definition of what it is to be human is wrong. It's wrong. It's desperately wrong. The Maharal considers this in detail, and he says, the essence of the human being is not thinking, but speech. Speech. What's the difference between thinking and speech? Thinking is purely mental. Thinking, in a certain sense, is purely spiritual. Speech brings the spiritual into the physical. Speech is a marriage of the spiritual and the physical, and that's the job of the human being. That's the unique ability of the human being. Because the human being has a soul and a body, the human being himself is an amalgam of the spiritual and the physical. He can be the bridge between the two. He's the one who's supposed to take the spiritual and use it to impress on the physical and elevate the physical. When in Genesis it says, God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul, Onkelos translates Ruach Mamalala, which means a speaking spirit. The essence of a human being's life is speaking because it crosses the boundary between the spiritual and the physical. The Greeks didn't get that. This is a different concept of what a human being is. And I think this point is expressed clearly by what we say about the Chanukah Menorah. And although the poskim discuss this, and there is some discussion of it, but I think what we say, and where it's learned in the Ran, is universal practice. We say, we have no permission to use them, the Chanukah lights, ella lirosam bilvad, just to look at them, just to see them. Can't use them for any purpose. What about the purpose of learning Torah? To sit in front of the menorah and open up a sefer and learn Torah. So the poskim discuss this, but some say that that's absolutely forbidden. The Ran says it's forbidden because, just like the menorah in the temple you couldn't use for any purpose whatsoever, including learning Torah, and this menorah is supposed to be a symbol of that menorah, you can't use it for any purpose other than to look at them. I'll come back to what that means in a moment. But now, look how that affects the picture we started with. If you thought that in Hanukkah we're celebrating the triumph of Jewish philosophy over Greek philosophy, then on the contrary, the highest thing you could do, sitting in front of the menorah, is to study Jewish philosophy. Because that's what the victory is all about. It's all about the greatness of Jewish philosophy over Greek philosophy. But we don't do that. We don't do that. The message is not that we have the better philosophy. The message is that we as human beings are not thinkers. That's not what we are. We're speakers, engaged in amalgamating the spiritual into the physical so as to elevate the physical and make it spiritual as well. That's what human beings are. Now, again, what does it say in Aristotle? Aristotle, Kodesh Heim. They're holy. They're holy. We have no right to use them, just to look at them. That means that the Kedusha, the holiness, is the highest goal. Not having the right philosophy, not thinking the right philosophy, not learning the right philosophy, but holiness is the goal. And the philosophy that we have, and the understanding, the intellectual understanding that we have, is a means to achieving that holiness. That's what it's for. And that has to be the essential message of Chanukah. Not the superiority of the philosophy, but the goal of the human being and the nature of the human being, which is bringing the spiritual into the physical in the name of holiness. That's why, when we do any mitzvah, we have a bracha. The bracha says, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu. It doesn't just say God commanded us to do it, and I'm fulfilling His command. It says He sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us. Why is that introduction there? Every time, in every mitzvah, every blessing that you make on a mitzvah, it always starts, He sanctified us by the commandments. It is to tell you that the purpose of the mitzvah is to achieve sanctity. We say this even with respect to the mitzvah of learning Torah. The mitzvah of learning Torah is not an end unto itself. The mitzvah of learning Torah, like the mitzvah of keeping kosher, like the mitzvah of eating matzah in the spring and blowing the shofar in the fall, the purpose of learning Torah is to become holy. That's what it's for. The Zohar says there are 613 strategies. Strategies. Taryag itin. Itin is Aramaic for etzos. A strategy is a means by which you accomplish something else. What's the something else? Holiness, connection to God. All 613 commandments are means. They're not ends, but means. Means to connecting to God and to holiness. That's their purpose, that's their function, that's their importance. And that includes the learning of Torah. And that's why when you have a direct manifestation of holiness, you can't even use it to learn Torah. Because holiness is higher than Torah. Holiness is the purpose of Torah. Now, this could have a double effect. One side is to try to appreciate what holiness is and to try to make sure that the 8 days of Chanukah give us a push in that direction. But also, I think it should be a push to think about learning Torah and think about what it's for and to ask ourselves how we could implement in the learning of Torah this spiritual element. Of course, when you're learning Torah, the immediate pressure is to understand what you're learning. That's the immediate pressure. You want to understand. But let's take that desire to understand and put it in a larger context. What does the blessing say in the morning? What are we commanded to do? Lasok b'divrei Torah. Lasok means to be occupied with. The blessing is not that we're commanded to understand, to learn, to remember, to analyze, to create new insights into. The commandment is to be occupied with Torah. There's a famous remark of the Chafetz Chaim. When we finish Masechta, there's a long speech that we make, formal speech that's, word for word. And one of the phrases that we say there is, we're talking about Yoshvei Kronos, who are people who are engaged in ordinary occupations and who don't see the higher meanings in life. And it says, Anu amelim v'hem amelim. We expend effort and they expend effort. Anu amelim v'kabel schar. We expend effort and get rewarded. V'hem amelim v'hem v'kabel schar. And they expend effort and are not rewarded. The Chafetz Chaim said, what do you mean they're not rewarded? Take a craftsman, let's say a shoemaker. Those days, when you wanted a pair of shoes, you went into the shoemaker, he measured your foot, and then he made shoes for you out of whole leather. But then when you picked him up, you paid him. So what do you mean we make effort and get paid, and they make effort and don't get paid? So the Chafetz Chaim said, what happens if you go into the shoemaker, he measures your foot, you come back 2 weeks later, and you put on what he created, and it doesn't fit? Do you pay him? No, you do not pay him. You pay him for a finished, appropriate product. You don't pay him for a failure. So he spent 2 weeks working and didn't get paid. Now, what's the parallel in learning Torah? The parallel is, I spend 2 weeks on a Tosfos, banging my head against the Tosfos, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I walk away without understanding. Do I get paid for that? Yes, I do. I get paid. Because the mitzvah is to be occupied with Divrei Torah. And I was occupied with the Divrei Torah for 2 weeks. So I get paid for that. That's just to loosen the grip between study of Torah and understanding. The mitzvah is to be occupied. Now, more than that, here we come directly, I think, to the spiritual side of holiness. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. I've tried this test on many people. I tell them, the Mishnah says, Halome Torah zocha l'dvarim harbe. A person who learns Torah merits many things. And the Mishnah goes on with a whole long list of great privileges and abilities and successes that someone who learns Torah gets. I quote it to them, start to discuss it, and then I say, I didn't quote the Mishnah correctly. I didn't quote, did you catch the mistake? Now, ask yourself, did you catch the mistake? I'm asking you, I'm asking the people in the recording, did you catch the mistake? I left out a word. Which word did I leave out? Halomei Torah lishma, the Mishnah says. Lishma, zocha l'dvarim harbe. He has to learn it lishma. Not just learn it, but learn it lishma. What does lishma mean? The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Yud, says lishma means for love of the Creator who commanded it. That's how it has to be learned. To learn for love of the Creator that commanded it. What does that involve? What does that require? How do you apply it? I think the Hasidic movement emphasized lishma in its attitude towards Talmud Torah, but there's very little written on what you can do to make your learning lishma. I have a couple of suggestions. One suggestion that I heard from my youngest son, which I think is a brilliant suggestion, you're studying with a chavrusa, with a study partner, and you come across a problem and you can't solve it. A difficult problem, back and forth, you can't solve it. During the night, you're thinking about it, and the answer hits you. I've got it. What do? You come in the next morning and say, I got it. Listen, I have the answer. How about instead of that, saying, I heard this from somebody. I remembered last night that I heard this from somebody. I don't remember who, but somebody told me this answer. Tell me what you think. What's the difference? The difference is that the I has been subtracted. I'm not taking credit for it. Give the credit to somebody else. Okay, it's not true. It's perfectly permissible to tell an untruth like this. And that means there's less ego in it that way. That's much more to do it, lishma, than to use it as a vehicle to build yourself up and increase your reputation and show off how great you are. That's much more lishma if you do it that way. That's one example. Another example, and this is something which anybody who learns in yeshiva sees this going on all the time. I and my chavrusa are stuck. We can't figure something out. In many Batei Medrash, there are people who are paid just to stand there and answer questions. Try that in universities. They're there all the time. When you have a problem, you're stuck, you go to this person and he helps you out. So that you should be able to make progress. You have instant access to somebody who's a much more accomplished scholar than you are. Boy, what that would do for university education. Instead of making an appointment for 2 weeks hence and so forth and so on. But now, suppose the people who are paid to give answers are busy, and you and your chavrusa are stumped. It's an unwritten rule that you can stop anybody and get help. You can go up to the front rank and say, listen, we're stuck. We can't read this Rashi. Please help us. And they will stop and help you. Because learning Torah is a joint effort. It's a social effort. It's a community effort. It's not the individual. I grew up in university libraries. where it's absolutely silent. Absolute silence. And you are left in total isolation. Jewish learning is the exact opposite. Now, how does that advanced student feel when he's working on a very difficult, sophisticated text, and his beginner comes up and says, please read and translate Rashi for me? If he hasn't got it, if he hasn't understood it, then his feeling is, oh, yeah, I guess I have to do this, but what a waste of time. I mean, this is absolutely elementary. And I'm working on the top stuff. That's not lishma. That's not doing it for love of your Creator who commanded you to do it. Because your Creator wants you to help people. He wants you to be available to people. The greatest scholars throughout Jewish history made themselves available to the public at no charge to answer their questions. That's what a posek is. Every Jewish community has organized something called a wasteland of people who simply give their time to the public free of charge, simply to sit there and answer questions. And many are available by phone. And they answer both men and women. One of my daughters had a problem at 1:30 a.m. It was coming to Pesach, and things were being prepared in the house. She called up a posek, one of these decisors, and she started to apologize for calling at 1:30 a.m. and said, don't apologize. Because if you feel you have to apologize, next time you're going to hesitate. And you won't pick up the phone. I'm here, that's my job, that's what I'm here for. If you need an answer at 1:30 a.m., call at 1:30 a.m. and don't apologize and don't hesitate. Find me a professor at Harvard like that. Find me a doctor at, a professor at Johns Hopkins Hospital like that. That's learning Torah lishma, for the sake of what you can do for others. It's the same point that we started with before, and now it's applied over here as well, for the light that shines forth from it, not just from the great ideas that you have. Rabbi Gottlieb, who founded Lakewood Yeshiva in America, said, if I had been left to learn, I could have written Sfarim, books, that would have turned the world upside down. Instead, I made Lakewood Yeshiva. He didn't say that out of regret. He said that by saying, America was a wasteland. He established the standard for Talmud Torah for the whole country. Lakewood became the center and the standard of Talmud Torah for the whole country. Lakewood sent out satellites to dozens of communities, Kiruv Kodolim, senior students, advanced students, married, who set up themselves in a place where there were no religious people or very few religious people, and learned and taught freely for the public. That's what Lakewood stood for. Lakewood set standard for the whole country. Rav Aaron knew that that's what needed to be done, and as I say, he didn't regret doing it in the country. That was what the Kodesh Baruch Hu needed to be done in the world. So, we understand that the human being's job is to use the spiritual to transform the physical. And when he does that, he's taking what he has and spreading it further. And when he learns Torah, the learning of Torah can't be a Greek gesture. Here, the Greek idea has a way to worm itself inside. As against other ideas like everything is nature and there is no creator. So anybody who reads Genesis knows that's wrong. But here, the intellectual effort is so great in our circles, in our study of Torah, that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination to glorify, to deify the intellectual insight as if it were the key service of God, the key success in Jewish terms, that's a very much more difficult temptation to deal with. Chanukah should help us to remember what the locus of learning is, the form of learning is, what the purpose of learning is ultimately, is not to become very smart. I'm going to finish a little early, but I just want to tell you one little story. We had a guy here, I'm here 34 years, he's probably here 25 years ago. He had finished undergraduate school, and he was going to go to business school. I think he was accepted to Stanford Business School. And he said, my goal, I think he was 22, he said, my goal is to make $1 million by the time I'm 35. That's my goal. And now that was 25 years ago, and then it was $1 million was something. Today it would be $5 million. That's my goal. And he said, I have heard that the Talmud makes you smart. And that's why I'm coming here. I'm coming to study Talmud, to become smart, to earn $1 million by the time I'm 35. That's why I'm here. Don't talk to me about commandments. Don't talk to me about God, Kashrus, Shabbos. Forget it. I'm not interested in that. I don't believe in any of that. I just want to be smart. Good. He studied for a whole year. That's all he did. Studied Talmud. Nothing else. And he was a bright kid. And he really got into it. After the first year, he said, wow, this is really terrific. I think I want to try a second year. In the middle of the second year, it started to happen. Middle of the second year, slowly but surely, it began to seep in. And it began to have an effect on his attitudes and his relative values and his perception of the world and his preferences. And by the end of the second year, he was already practicing mitzvos and he was in. So that's the idea of absorbing that the study of Torah is not just an intellectual gesture. If you start that way, you haven't got it. That isn't it. The study of Torah is an attempt to elevate the personality, to develop the soul, to project the spiritual into the physical. That's what it's for. And that, hopefully, is something we can try to take along with us from Chanukah to elevate the coming period of time, the bleak winter, as I put it on the sign.